Lance, thanks for coming on with us tonight.
Yeah, of course.
We got a bunch of stuff that we want to get to. I know, Nate, do you want to start us off here with a question?
Yeah, I have a lot of your posters and stuff that you've made for bands like Pearl Jam, and I've always just wondered, checking out the posters that I hung up on the wall, like, where did you get your start? Where did it all, start from?
Yeah, hopefully you got posters that I got paid from. I'm kidding. There's some bootlegs out there. Man, that's I started really young. I've known that I wanted to be a photographer since I was probably around 13 or 14, and it's kind of a similar story that a lot of musicians have, which is I started going to punk rock shows in Seattle when I was around 13. My first show was Black Flag at this actually a club above a strip joint downtown, real seedy. But that definitely was my calling. I mean, it spoke to me. I was like a lot of kids. And I always had this impression that in order to be a photographer, you had to be Ansel Adams. I mean, this is, pre-digital by a long shot. So my dad gave me a Pentax K1000 when I was like 14, which is basically a no frills camera that you could buy at Kmart for 150 bucks. Worked without a battery, just fully manual camera, film camera. And I was destined to be just another skater, dropout punk kid. Nothing really, I didn't have my sights on anything, but there was a teacher. I think we all have them. I call them pilot lights. There's these moments in our life that things take a turn,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it's important to remember those. And that's why I call them pilot lights. But there was a teacher at the high school that asked me what I wanted to do. And I told him that I wanted to be a photographer. And he was the first person to ever ask me that. So we built a darkroom, at the school, which is still there. That started me off, and I brought this camera with me with my friends and everybody I was hanging out with to shows. I shot a lot of photos. They were horrible, but I was trying to capture what I was feeling. And then a big inspiration for me, which is, again, you hear this a lot with musicians, was the music I was listening to, the photos that went along with it. They inspired me because they weren't like Ansel Adams photos. They weren't technically proficient. It was the cover of London Calling, which is out of focus and blurry. It's the cover of the Ramones standing on a street corner against a brick wall. It's, all of that imagery, I felt like I could do. So that, like I said, that really inspired me to continue. My last year of high school, I was able to get into a commercial photography program at a community college. And at the same time, the music scene in Seattle was growing, more than just a small insular punk rock scene. And I realized that my whole kind of style, if you will, was just hanging out, and I happened to have a camera. So I realized that whenever I put the camera up to my face, the reaction I got was different than if I just kind of, was more stealth about it. So that's something that I've developed over the years, but this is a long answer to your question.
Oh no, it's great. We love it.
Okay, cool. So, let's see. So I really was focused on doing the best that I could with this because I was really passionate about it. Like to the point where I was working a job as a janitor at night so that I could pay my way through school during the day. And I was still a big part of the scene. I would still go out. I mean, you got to realize I was only 17 at that time. So then, let's see, as bands started to develop more and kind of grew, and there was a band called Malfunction,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of an early. So there you have bands like Green River, Malfunction, which had people in it that went off to do Mother Love Bone. Basically, they kind of converged.
So these bands are coming up as you're kind of honing your craft simultaneously.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, we're
Very
all
cool.
friends, you know? I mean, this is like, there wasn't like, it wasn't like I sought it out, is my point. And the fact that it wasn't necessarily that I never really got hired, but they didn't ask me to take photos because of my photography, more because at that time, technically, you get asked to do that stuff because it's film. You know, not everybody knew how to develop film or to print or whatever. So, so as these bands grew, you know, there's other parts of this, but as these bands grew, I went along with it. Mother Love Bone being the first, because I've been asked this before. Like Mother Love Bone was the first band that was getting attention from outside of Seattle. You got to remember, being in Seattle, we're like physically up in the corner. You know, there was no bands like signing any deals or anything. They were the first ones to get like major label attention. Plus the fact that they had this lead singer, Andy Wood, who embraced and encompassed everything that I was looking for as far as subject matter. I mean, he loved the camera. You know what I mean? Here I am shooting people that pretended like they didn't want to get their photo taken. And whereas he had this character, Landry, that was Freddie Mercury and T-Rex and, you know, all combination of all those things. So in a way, he became a muse for me. And just, I ate it up, you know? So that was the first time where I realized, probably one of the first times where I actually got paid to take photos as well. And that's where Jeff and I really honed in on our collaboration as well. So
it sounds like the band photography thing was just a very organic situation. It wasn't like you were seeking out, I want to be a band photographer. It was more like, I'm out with my friends and they're in bands and I like to go out to shows and I'm taking pictures too.
Kind of, yes and no. I mean, music has been a huge part of my life from the very beginning. So I didn't really talk about it too much, but you know, I started by shooting live music. Like this punk rock scene that I was a part of, I was trying to capture the feeling that I was getting from being at those shows. I was like, if I can just like get this all in a photograph, like that was kind of my intent. Do you know how like people would go to show, or you go to show and it still happens, and you're fucking having a great time and you want to take pictures of it so that when you look back on it, or you can show somebody it, you can be like, look how great this show was. But typically the person that you're showing to, you know, the band is like this big, or you got the back of somebody's head, or it just doesn't convey. So that's something, you know, I knew that I had to get closer. I knew I had to be like right up front. And I can tell you, I can count the times on my hand where I have captured that moment. Like I'm still chasing that. You know what I mean? And that's a good thing. Like once, yeah, it's the same thing. People playing in bands, they're always chasing that feeling of, you know, being on stage and having that connection with the audience and all that. So it wasn't, I would say music first and photography, like combining the two. You know?
So with Mother Love Bone, did they look at you as like, you're our guy, or were you just at that point more of a fan? You know what I mean?
They had no choice. I became that guy. I think both. They were definitely comfortable with me. Like that is more of Jeff Ament having ideas and me being able to implement those ideas visually. So him being like, I really want to get this, and then me kind of saying, yes, I can do that. Even if I didn't know how to do it, I'd figure it out. So through that, you know, once you get it right, then you continue. They're like, that was great. We love it. We're going to keep doing this. You know what I mean? Although there was a time where we did a photo shoot. We did a photo shoot at Stone's parents. He was still living with his parents at the time. And they didn't know that we were doing a photo shoot. And I brought all my lights and we rolled up the carpet. And Jeff had this background that he painted. And we hung that up. And then Stone's mom came home in the middle of the day for lunch or something. And she's like, I had no idea. But
what's
so we
happening in
did
my
all
kitchen?
this. Yeah, exactly. So we did all this work. And I mean, you got to remember, I was still pretty green doing this stuff. So I brought lights in, and I remember I shot all the film at the wrong shutter speed. So when you use strobe lights, if the shutter speed is too fast, you'll get only half a frame.
Yeah.
And it's changed since then. Now I think they give you a little more leeway. But so Jeff, so a couple things happened during that I learned lessons from. One, just to double check my equipment, and because I was like sweaty, I was so nervous shooting this thing. And then two, don't ever let the person meet you at the photo lab. Make sure that your shit is dialed in before you show the person. So Jeff met me at the photo lab, and we got all the color. It was slide film. We got all back, and it was just all half images. Like it was no. And he was like, what happened? And man, I was sweating again. But luckily, we got to do it again. Roll up the carpet. This time he told his parents.
I was going to say, did he tell his parents this time?
Yeah,
or did he just do it again?
Time he did. Yeah. That was the first big session I did. Well, second session I did with Love Bone. And then, man, they hit the scene hard though. They were like, it seems like it lasted longer, but I think it was only like for a summer where they started playing shows, and just Seattle just loved them.
And what year is this?
88.
88. Okay.
89.
So you were literally in the Seattle scene, and this is all coming together and kind of on the rise, and you're in tandem with them.
Yeah, man. I started going to shows in Seattle in 1980. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Malfunction, I guess it was more than a summer though, because Andy passed away in 90, but my dates, I'm going to be horrible with dates. So I'll just tell you that now.
Time frames. We're the same way now. We're getting older, and it's harder to remember.
Yeah. My brain is shot. But yeah, so they, but at the same time, Soundgarden was happening. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Soundgarden was a band 10 years prior to them really getting any national fame. Mm-hmm. They were around in all that punk rock stuff. But I did get the cover of Ultra Mega OK without knowing it at that same time. Chris and Andy were roommates. So Chris was around. But he's like, oh yeah, by the way, we used your photo for the cover. And I was like,
that's awesome.
Oh, cool.
That makes sense with what you were saying earlier in terms of catching the live essence of the show, because that cover you feel like you're at the show with that photo.
Really cool. Man, that's cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. What's crazy about that photo is that it was at this little tiny room above a restaurant. And there literally was 2 lights in that room. And I mean, I think I got 4 frames of that whole show that came out. I had kind of figured out how to push my film so I could shoot at a dark club. But that's a perfect example of not throwing away film. That negative, I've had to get everything out of that as I could. Even then, I just, talk about not being technically proficient. I wasn't looking for I don't know. It worked with the image. So
the technology is obviously at that point not as advanced as it is today, right? I mean, you're grinding to get everything out of all those films, those negatives.
Oh yeah, man. So I could, even back then there was, I'll try not to get too technical. There was a film that I was really excited about called T-Max 3200, and I was like, shit, the fact that I can push. So normal black and white film was 400 speed. This film could go up to 3200, and now digital cameras, I mean, you can shoot in a room where you can't see something in front of you, and the camera will pick it up.
Yeah.
So you can push cameras, and it's still like the quality is still okay to like 64,000, 100,000. Like, it's just insane. I'm baffled still by technology, but that was kind of my thing though. It's like, how far can I push, you know? But it also worked with the music, if that makes sense.
You said something interesting with Mother Love Bone, and like you knew they were getting traction, and then with Soundgarden, it took 10 years. In that moment, did you know that it was something big? Because like I almost equate it to like the DC Discord records. Like those kids knew that was something special. Like, did you know it was something special in that moment?
Yes. Love Bone. I mean, if I were to take just those two, Soundgarden was pretty weird and arty, you know?
Yeah.
Which I loved. I mean, they had I was a little hardcore kid, so I didn't gravitate towards that stuff too much at first, you know, like bands with long hair or playing more rock or slowed down. So Soundgarden was definitely not as palatable. And then you had Love Bone, which was like colorful and hooky, melodic, and this like eccentric lead singer who could be playing to 20 people but acting like he was playing to a fucking arena. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, seriously. He did that all. I saw that a lot of times. He was like, to the people in the balcony, and there's like no balcony.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but so it was just, you know, it was easy, and very colorful, and so it was pretty obvious that they were, I don't know, they made like that kind of, that being a rock star, they made that okay.
Yeah.
Most of the time people kind of are not, you know, they kind of go against that. They're, you know, people, I mean, look, people being in a band is like one of the most narcissistic things you can do. It's just like flourishes your ego, you know? So, but then bands don't want people to think that they're being egotistical, whereas Love Bone, it was all about that, you know.
It's cool that they embraced that, though. I mean, that's what made them them, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's all Andy, you know. The language, the look, the font, like basically Jeff took a lot of that, and that became kind of their trademark or their visual branding, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that included the photos. So getting back to your question about, you know, the collaboration, or, you know, Jeff wanted to make sure that the imagery was the same. And that's something where I learned a lot through that process, collaborating, you know, like putting aside my own ego and just being able to really focus on like the imagery matched the music, you know. So there was kind of this connection between the two. So it wasn't just my own like looking to get my name out. It was basically just trying to make sure I was doing justice for all that stuff.
Well, you were telling the story of it in picture. I mean, if we were, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 when a lot of this was going on, and just looking at those photos, you definitely get a feeling for what it was like being there. And that, I know you kind of talked about trying to get that picture, those couple of pictures at a show to really convey what's going on. I've tried to do that, obviously, with my iPhone at concerts, and it's always to terrible results, and it doesn't look good. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put my phone in my pocket and enjoy this, because I'm going to leave that to the professionals.
Right. Oh, dude. I mean, I had that going to see like Van Halen when I was a little kid, like trying to, it just was pointless. I mean, literally, like David Lee Roth was like, so tiny in the photos, but I would just like, it would need some dialogue to go on with, and then he did this and then he did that. Yeah, but it drives me crazy at shows watching people basically standing in the back and the flash on their camera going off. It's like you just lit up the people's heads in front of you. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Makes me crazy. So yeah. I mean it was a big deal. I mean, shooting live, like all that stuff is just trying to observe and then capture what I'm seeing and capture and have that all kind of come together. I mean, I spent a lot of time, learning my gear, but then forgetting it, things like that, so that I wouldn't be encumbered by what I had, and also keeping it really simple, so I could kind of be stealth about it. And like I said, not let people see me so they didn't see camera going up to my face, but also learning how to shoot kind of became a signature of mine, where I could, before autofocus even, I did this thing where I laid out tape measures so I could visually understand like how far 4 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet would be, so that I could set my focus on my manual lens to that and then shoot without looking through the camera. And I also did things like, I realized I could get a different angle, and I could get closer if I just put my arm out. So like, let's say I'm in front of the stage, and if I extended my arm out, I get that extra couple of feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I can get underneath the guitar or whatever. So that, just all those little things played into it.
Well, it sounds like with your attention to detail and just, capturing, the true ethos of a live show, it goes very much in flavor of Pearl Jam. And we're very curious. It's kind of the poster I was referencing earlier is from the 10 album. It's the one of Eddie jumping into the crowd. It's like a 24 by 36 promo poster that I love that you shot.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, you did get paid for this one.
You had that poster?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got it right here.
The double-sided poster. Oh, dude, that's killer.
That's awesome.
I only have one left of that. Oh, it's so good.
Mint condition. Yeah. So one of the reasons I reached out to you, because we were, we talk about music on this podcast. The guys here know me as kind of a diehard Pearl Jam fan. I was born in '84, so I grew up in the '90s, but I didn't get to see them in, the times that you were with them, '91 through '95. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about right. Well, yeah, I'll talk about that. But yeah, that was kind of where I was doing all things Pearl Jam around that time, through that time. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, after Andy died, it was tough. Nobody was sure what those guys were going to do. I mean, it's a pretty big loss in Seattle, in a lot of different ways. But I guess it was about a year later, Jeff called me, and I didn't know what was going on, but they said they had this guy, they started this new band, and they had this guy, and I came down to the practice room, and I literally spent maybe an hour. We walked around and shot photos, and that was about it. And that was the first kind of incarnation of Pearl Jam, when it was still Mookie Blaylock, and quick and painless, man. It was just a real quick shoot. It was tough though, like seeing what. Go ahead.
I was going to say, at this point, you already had the rapport with both Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard, so it was kind of a natural progression.
Yeah, totally. We were good friends. They trusted me for sure. Natural progression, and then it took me a couple of shows. Well, I shot their first show. It was tough though to see Jeff and Stone playing together without Andy in between them was hard, like the first time. And it was a lot different, of course. It wasn't Mother Love Bone. It couldn't be without Andy. But I remember the first thing I noticed, he was climbing a lot. He was climbing from the very beginning. Yeah.
Crazy Ed, right?
You're like, what the fuck? But it made, for me, it was great for photos. Yeah. So that, again, there is a band. I mean, so a couple of kind of sacred territories for me as shooting music are the recording studio and like the dressing room at shows. Like those are just, I don't just assume I can be there. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Regardless of how close I am with the band. That comes from being asked. So getting asked to come out, like Jeff knew what I did already and he was comfortable with me. So asked me to come out while they were making 10. And I got to know the other guys a little bit better. But that first demo, I'll never forget sitting in my car listening to it just front to back, going like, and again, this wasn't necessarily my type of music, but it was very obvious and apparent that I just had this feeling like, oh shit, this is going to be huge. Mm-hmm. Like, when I say huge, I don't mean like huge like they became or become, but right. Just as far as it's definitely more than just a little novelty project, it was like really well done and catchy, and it had all of those things that you just never know. That stuff you can't predict that stuff. But
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So speaking to your,
I just ramble on. You got to stop me.
So will I. So we're a good pair.
Yeah.
So speaking of, not taking for granted being in the dressing room and all that backstage stuff, we kind of were thinking like, so are you kind of a de facto part of the band at this? I mean, you're with them for a lot of things. Are you traveling with them when they go to shows in the States or even abroad? Are you like in the van with them? Are you doing pictures that way? How does that kind of come about?
I mean, yeah, I guess so. I'm not like part of the band. I just became part of they brought along people they trusted, and, whether it be guitar techs or they kept it very, kind of small and intimate as far as people that went along with them. But yeah, they did a few shows, and then they went off to Europe to do a press. We did the record cover. I'd been spending time with them. So doing that record cover, for instance, that took a couple of days, and we were friends, so we all hung out, I never made a big production out of my photography, whether it's live or publicity or anything. So it just gets back to that, keeping it simple and trusting each other. But yeah, they asked me to go on tour after they did a quick press tour in Europe, and they came back, and then that was the Chili Peppers Nirvana shows. That was the big show in San Francisco on New Year's in '91, and then they did some dates up and down the West Coast. So yeah, I realized pretty quickly I needed to get bigger lenses, Mm-hmm. The days of shooting just in the small little club were gone. A lot of the pictures from those shows aren't that great because I couldn't get close enough. But I quit my job at that same time. I'd been working at a photo lab, and that was the last regular job I've had since. I've been self-employed as a photographer since 91, 92, 91. I was stoked, man. I was like, I'm gonna, be Leibowitz shooting the Stones or whatever, but it wasn't. I had created.
You kind of were for our generation. I mean.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, just as far as like the photos that I had been studying and looking at of what I wanted to do, that times were a lot different. You know, the days of bands partying that hard and being together and, you know, we're gone. Do you know what I mean? It was there. Being on tour is a pretty boring time most of the time. But I didn't care. I was totally down. Like, sign me up. I'm going. So yeah, that started, you know, it started to build, and as they grew, they definitely, as you know, as anybody knows that's a fan of the band, they wanted to have control over all of most of their, as much as they could, they wanted to have control over what went out. You know, they weren't doing a lot of interviews, they weren't doing videos, they kind of reined things in. And I played a part in that because they could use me to shoot photos and then, you know, have that direct contact with me as to which photos went out.
One thing I just thought of is, like, this is all pre-internet, pre-bands having websites. Like, what do you think their intent was to have you out with them? Was it like to be in the CD booklet or like press? Because now it's like all about the optics of, like, you have a website, you have an Instagram, you're on Twitter, and it's to like make the band look as good as possible. Like, I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 6 years, 7, whatever it was, 8 years old back then. Like, what was the intent, you think?
I think it was, like I said, just to have control over it. So, like, I don't know what, I mean, they never really talked to me in detail about the intent, but, you know, if they would do an interview, then they could have approval over the photos that got used, because it would be my photos. So they'd say no to a photo shoot, and then, you know, and I had a lot of photographers mad at me because there was those first 3 songs and then they would clear the pit, but I got to shoot the whole show. So there were things like that. And I'll never forget, they did things like the first 3 songs would be, they'd keep the lights really low. So the photography, so there wasn't these images that were, so photographers were pissed, and then they would see me sitting up there on the stage. I got flipped off a few times. But yeah, I think, you know, for instance, like, that Time magazine cover, you know, Eddie didn't want to be on, that wasn't an interview. That was just something that, and I was right there standing next to the photographer that shot that. I mean, I have those same photos basically, and, you know, said no to it. They couldn't control all of it, but it just made it more comfortable. Like, or, you know, rather than a photographer coming out for, like, there was a Spin interview they did, and so rather than somebody that they didn't know coming out, they'd just be like, we're just going to use Lance. It's cool. He's a friend. And
it's awesome.
You know, I spent all day at Eddie's house shooting Polaroids and doing weird shit. So I think they were it felt more comfortable, and it made sense, not just with the photography and with me, but just everything that they did.